А что ты, Игорек?
Самолет.
Ну и слава.
Туру видишь? Ну это значит, наверное, летчик погиб.
Да.
А ты на видос снимаешь? Люди все радуются. Тут с этой стороны.
А чем ты это? Никуда не.
Там не бомбануло.
Оно сначала летело.
Или там в нескольких частях, слышишь? Да, походу горит.
Только что вот смотрю, вон сбили самолет, он падает вниз, упал. Вот туда, где прогресс.
Ладно, все, солнышко.
Капрогресс.
Да вот мы вышли, вон, видишь, вон осколки еще летят, вон черные.
Да.
Что-то бахнуло, да вон еще падает. Вон, смотри, черный дым за терриконом, где прогресс.
Пошла работа.
Выйди. Смотри, вот
Да,
террикон на красное, этот, смотри.
А там живой же.
Черный дым поднимается, нихера себе. Вот мы только что смотрели, как самолет взорвался и падает. Да, падал самолет.
Ну крепко жахнуло.
А ну позвони ему.
We have the benefit experts to be able to do an examination of the aircraft to determine, in fact, if it was struck, where it was struck, what kind of weapon was used. They'll also be able to understand the trajectory of the weapon that was fired, where it came from and it originated. So they're going to be able to get some real-time information on the ground very quickly. As for Russia, there's no way that Russia is going to claim that they shot down a passenger plane, ever.
Right.
Even if they had some kind of involvement in it by providing the weapon systems or anything like
Sure.
that, they're not going to claim this. It is too problematic for them internationally to do so.
All right. And you know what? Before we go to Wendell, I do want to say this. There was a tweet that was put out very early on. Do we have that to pop up on the screen? I don't know if we do or not.
I've got the tweet in front of me.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, Sandra.
Well, I mean, this is important. This is what we know, because, again, we're going off of reports from Interfax, which is a Russian non-government news agency. But this is what we do know. This is Malaysian Airlines tweeting this out, that they have lost contact with MH117 from Amsterdam. The last known position was over Ukrainian airspace. More details to follow. I've got the Twitter feed in front of me constantly. I'll be watching it. Something else that has also been confirmed is the London Bureau, our London Bureau, is reporting that Amsterdam Airport is still not confirming anything on their side as well. So we're going
Except that the plane took off from there.
Except for the fact that the plane took off from there.
All right. A couple new things. And you'll see us intermittently put up this Sky News video of that smoke, and there it is again. We want to just say this and get on the record with this now. This is what witnesses are telling us that is on the ground there. We're not getting, what we like to do is triangulate confirmation of that from the airline, from Amsterdam, from the people who we have as sources inside that border area of Ukraine as well. So until we can really confirm that with 3 different sources, let's just go on the fact that that's possibly where the plane went down. We do know that other planes have gone down in this region. Just on Monday, a cargo plane was reportedly shot down in that same region. I mean, it's a war zone. Now, I had originally asked Kirsten this question about the White House. We're still trying to get some information, and let's go to Wendell Goler, who's live outside the White House. I'm curious, because this is kind of an interesting place where the president might step in. How do you get in? There's a war going on. You've got Putin on one side. What are your sources telling you, Wendell?
Well, we're still waiting for comment from the White House and from the State Department. The State Department folks have indicated they will comment during their briefing this afternoon. The president, of course, on his way to Delaware for an event on infrastructure. These reports came in just as Marine One was taking off from the South Lawn. This, of course, comes a day after the president stepped up sanctions on Russia. He said they hadn't stopped supporting the pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine Ukraine. In fact, officials said on background they had increased their support for pro-Russian separatists. And on the transport plane shot down on Monday that you mentioned, senior administration officials said that plane was shot down, an AN-26 transport jet, from an altitude of 21,000 feet, which this official said indicated that the separatists had very sophisticated weapons and would be able to reach that far. This Malaysian passenger jet apparently traveling at about 33,000 feet. So it would take sophisticated weapons to shoot it down, and it's our understanding that the pro-Russian separatists have them. But once again, we're awaiting comment from both the White House and the State Department on this latest incident, Harris.
The Russians shoot down a while back, and there's been a Korean, I think North Korea took down one or two also. But when they do that, they said that they did attempt to communicate. Now, the issue with the transponder and swapping the right codes and making sure you identify yourself as this particular flight would depend on many things. It would depend on the pilot, making sure they have the right codes in the airliner. It would depend upon the intercepting aircraft or radar being able to intercept that and know that it's a civilian jetliner, and they should have it. Certainly Russia has it, the Ukraine has it, and if it was a military flight, and they were, up at altitude, they actually, they shouldn't have been at the commercial jetliner altitude, but in conflict, people ignore the international laws, of course, then it could have been an air missile. It could have been a heat-seeking missile as well. So it's difficult to tell, but a lot depends. People don't understand how very important it is to have those identifier codes identifying your aircraft as a civilian aircraft, which is very, very important. So there may be similarities between the disappearance in terms of identification of the plane, et cetera, but at 32,000 feet, there's no reason to shoot down a civilian jetliner. It'd be very difficult for it to do harm on the ground.
280 passengers were told, 15 crew. Reports that this Boeing 77, a Malaysia Airlines flight, crashed somewhere in eastern Ukraine near the Russian border. We do not know why at this point, simply no information about why this plane went down, only the reports from Interfax and Reuters that it in fact did. David Susi, I want to bring you back into this discussion. As we look at this map, we see the border between Ukraine and Russia, which has been in the news so much of late because of the hostilities there. Is that an area that a commercial airline should be flying over at all?
I wish that they had thought of that ahead of time, but yeah, there are routes there that they can fly. But the challenge is that when there's a conflict going on, there's no restricted routes. They're supposed to say, hey, these places are safe. They can go through here without any problem. Now, with regard to the being shot down or not, Mary's point was good about the fact that at that altitude, it shouldn't be involved in that conflict, and it should be a safe altitude to be at. And remember, too, that ground-to-air missiles really aren't designed for that high of an altitude. There's some very specialized ones that are, but in this particular conflict, it's not that sophisticated. You'd be looking at small.
And welcome back. 2 p.m. here on the East Coast as more and more people are tuning in now to this breaking news story. A Malaysian Airlines 777, and of course, if that sounds familiar, the same basic type of aircraft that went missing in the Indian Ocean. This incident far different. Feared, shot down near the Ukrainian-Russian border. Tom Costello covers aviation for us. He is in our Washington newsroom. Tom, tell us what we know at this hour about this story we've been covering.
This just crossing just now, Brian, the International Association of Air Transport Association is saying that based on the information currently available, it is believed that the airspace that the aircraft was traversing was not subject to restrictions, that it was not subject to restrictions. As we have said, the FAA gave a notice to airmen, to U.S. airmen back in April, suggesting that they do not traverse this area near the Russian-Ukrainian Crimea area because of, at the time, the Russian invasion of Crimea and because of the hostilities. And so U.S. airlines have been avoiding that area very much over the last few months. However, international carriers, especially those like this Flight 17, from Amsterdam into Kuala Lumpur using this direct route from Amsterdam into Asia, and it traverses, as you can see, this particular region, which has been the site of hostilities. We believe that there were 295 passengers and crew members on board this plane when, according to multiple media reports, it was shot out of the sky. The Malaysian authorities, Malaysia Airlines, says it received word from air traffic control in Ukraine saying that at about 9:15 or so Eastern time that the air traffic controllers lost contact with the plane. And then very quickly, Ukrainian authorities accused separatists of shooting the plane down using Soviet-era missiles, surface-to-air missiles. We can also tell you that we believe that there are many international people on board this plane. We have reports of Americans on board, of Dutch tourists on board, and you would probably expect Malaysian citizens on board as well. The other point that I would make is that we are watching this tragedy unfolding with Malaysia Airlines for the second time in 4.5 months following Flight 370's disappearance back in March, and that mystery has still not been solved. The plane, the wreckage, none of it has been found. Brian?
Tom, so many of the images we're watching have come in, these short clips we're now familiar with. We should point out this has happened in the countryside near a small village. Presumably, people with cameras. You look at that shot, those white streamers, those trails coming down, obviously something hot, looks like almost phosphorus burning from the wreckage or perhaps what brought it down. Presumably more and more people will be streaming to the scene, and we will get more video. NBC News, however, shot not a frame of it, and we can only go on what we know so far. Some of it's already coming in from the Russian 24-hour cable networks. On social media, a picture has appeared purporting to show the plane taking off in Amsterdam. We mentioned there are so many people who are aircraft buffs who record everything possible, people who have loved ones on that plane who wanted to stuck around at the airport to take a picture of it departing. There you see it would look like back to the more traditional white-themed livery paint job, though it's tough even when zoomed in to make out many details beyond the fact that that is the Malaysian logo on the tail, and it appears to have the same air signature as a 777. Tom, kind of spooky to see that, if presumably that would be the last view of this aircraft whole.
It's haunting, isn't it? And modern technology allows us now to get these immediate images. You know, one interesting phenomenon that we've noticed out of Russia and that area recently, in the last year and a half or so, is that everybody, it seems, has a camera, and many of them put these GoPro cameras on the dashboard of their car because there are so many accidents, they want to record what happens. And as a result, very often, you get images of breaking news that are recorded by multiple cameras. So that will be another interesting aspect of this, to see what other images might come up. But Brian, reporters on the scene are saying that the debris field stretches over 9 miles. That is a very large debris field, and that would suggest, in fact, that this plane may have come apart at altitude as opposed to coming down in one direct and confined spot or crash field. This is going to be a very difficult investigation, but it would be complicated by the fact that if this is, in fact, in rebel-held territory and they are accused of launching this missile, you will be questioning everybody's motives as to whether they have an interest in finding the necessary clues.
I'm going to read from a statement. NBC News has reached a man speaking in Russian from near where this happened. He said, you know how you see a trail from a plane? It was the same, but it was a missile launched from the ground. He says after seeing the trail, 2 seconds later, he heard the explosion. Some 10 seconds later, he saw smoke rising from the ground. He estimates he is about 3 miles from the site. He is a miner by trade, but an eyewitness who apparently is trying to describe the audio signature of a ground launch, the whoosh of an outgoing missile. And these Let's just take the SA-17 Russian missile. These are substantial launched vehicles, and they cannot be launched in a vacuum. Tom, as we've been saying, the U.S., because this is a war zone, has had eyes on these skies for a long time, satellites that presumably would show the trail, the signature of any outgoing missile from the ground to something in the air.
Yeah, our Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklashevsky says that in fact they're quickly and rapidly at the Pentagon and presumably at the CIA right now trying to look at all of that, all of those signatures to get a better handle on what happened. One other piece of information as it relates to Flight 17 in particular, our producer who's based in Frankfurt, Germany, Andy Eckert, says that this was apparently a code share with KLM, with the Dutch carrier KLM. And that code share would be KL4103. So you can imagine that there very well may be many people learning of this tragedy and may not have originally realized that a flight that their loved ones may have been on was in fact this particular plane.
Yeah, and veteran air travelers are familiar with this by now. You book a ticket on a domestic carrier like Delta, American, United, you're traveling overseas, you show up at the airport, and sometimes you find out that the aircraft, the paint job, belongs to another airline entirely, and you are buying via a domestic airline a ticket on an overseas airline. It can get confusing when you're trying to look for someone. So the fact that this is a KLM Royal Dutch Airlines code share, in fact, is crucial for the people who are now worried about these 295 souls on board this aircraft. And Tom, we also have the radar signature from FlightAware.com showing again, a kind of a sad visual showing how much of the flight was recorded until it wasn't, until contact was lost. That green line stretching in the upper left there, stretching from west to east in the picture.
Yeah, and I must say I was confused by this originally today, and here's why. Can we? I don't know if it's possible to zoom in a little bit on the Ukraine. Pardon me. The original flight path that came from FlightAware, and by the way, we use FlightAware every day. They're a very reliable source of flight tracking information. That original flight path showed that the plane lost contact in western Ukraine, way over near the border with Poland. But in fact, now they say, well, we've now updated based on all of our tracking information. Some of it lags because this is a part of the world that doesn't have the most sophisticated real-time tracking information. And as a result, they've updated the track to show that the flight did, in fact, come to an end right there, 20 to 40 miles west of the Russian border, right in that hotly contested area between Ukraine and Russia, in which separatists are fighting with the Russian military, with the Ukrainian military in a very heated area.
Yeah, this went down in a war zone, and it may not look like a traditional war zone. People looking at these pictures are seeing kind of farmland and individual single-family homes. We want to tell our viewers, especially those just joining us, President Obama is traveling today. He is coming up on an event at the port of Wilmington. I'm not sure our cameras are set up there and ready to show us what the backdrop will be, but we've been given guidance from the White House. Our own Chris Jansing telling us that, here we go, as he comes up to the microphone here, we hear "Hell to the Chief." He is going to apparently address this breaking story at the top of his remarks. Let's listen in on this event.
Hello, everybody. Everybody, please have a seat. Please have a seat. It is wonderful to be back in Delaware. Before I begin, obviously the world is watching reports of a downed passenger jet near the Russia-Ukraine border. And it looks like it may be a terrible tragedy. Right now, we're working to determine whether there were American citizens on board. That is our first priority. And I've directed my national security team to stay in close contact with the Ukrainian government. The United States will offer any assistance we can to help determine what happened and why. And as a country, our thoughts and prayers are with all the families of the passengers wherever they call home. I want to thank Jeremy for that introduction. Give Jeremy a big round of applause. It is great to be in the state that gave us Joe Biden.
As we said, the president at an event for another cause and another issue in Delaware, but briefly addressing at the top. As Andrea Mitchell indicated, it is so early in this, and it is not up to other nations. It's not up to the news media to release names, even if they know about passengers on board, to release facts about this, even if we're fairly secure. That has to come from the air carrier. There has to be a procedure that is followed here. We're talking about 295 souls. Earlier during a State Department briefing, we heard in the form of a journalist's question, could the State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki confirm or deny the presence of 23 Americans on the flight manifest? She declined to provide any more information, and it could be some time before we get more information on that. We were talking to Tom Costello, who covers aviation for us. So, Tom, people asking the very simple question, what were they doing flying over that airspace? You're reporting there were no current restrictions on it for this carrier.
Yeah, that's correct. Well, in fact, according to, let me bring it back up on my computer here, the International Air Transport Association is saying, based on the current information available, it believes the airspace that the aircraft was traversing was not subject to restrictions. That's the International Air Transport Association. But as we mentioned, the FAA issued its own notice to airmen back in April, suggesting that U.S. airlines avoid flying over that route. We discussed earlier that it's likely we will see international carriers announcing that they are going to be avoiding the airspace. And in fact, over the course of the past 2 hours, the list is growing rather quickly. It includes Lufthansa, it includes Aeroflot, it includes another airliner in Russia, and they are coming in as we speak. More and more airliners. British Airways says it does not traverse Ukraine, but it does fly into Kiev, and it says once a day, and it says that that is under review. I found this interesting. According to the head of the Ukrainian Airspace Regulatory Authority, he says that the Malaysian airliner was flying normally without problems until it disappeared from radar. I'm not sure how he would know that unless he's just simply looking at the trajectory on the radar, but he says the airliner was not having any difficulties before it disappeared. And we did also hear from Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, which says the families and friends of the people who were on board that flight have started now arriving in Amsterdam at the airport, and that authorities there are organizing all of them into an area for them to gather. They in Amsterdam, still waiting on the passenger manifest, which will likely, as we have said, have to come from Malaysia Airlines itself.
And Tom, back up to one of the points you just made, because this affects so much air commerce in so big an area. British Airways has under review the fact that they still have flights in and out of the city of Kiev.
That's correct. One flight a day out of apparently from Heathrow into Kiev. They're taking that under review, but they say they do not traverse Ukrainian airspace per se. I think I have flown over Ukrainian airspace, candidly. It was many years ago, flying from Amsterdam into Dubai. I mean, that's a pretty normal route to fly for if you're trying to get from Europe into Asia. This is not an unusual route, but I think that since, as we've seen clearly with U.S. airlines, since the hostilities, many airlines have decided that they're going to avoid the area if they can. Clearly, this will be one question, a very important question that is asked of Malaysian authorities. There may not be an official restriction on flying over Ukrainian airspace, but why were you doing that?
And, Tom, a question about the investigation, and we're going to have some investigators able to talk to us here shortly. How long is it generally before we find out, and I know this was a point of great contention after the last Malaysia Airlines incident, before we generally know the transcript of air traffic when the last radio transmission was from this aircraft to Eurocontrol?
Well, you can imagine that that the Ukrainian air traffic controllers have probably already pulled the tapes, and that they will then transcribe, or it will be given up to Eurocontrol to transcribe that air traffic control conversation. In the United States, they do not release the audio of any traffic of a doomed aircraft. They don't release air traffic control conversations with the pilots. Other countries have different regulations, and as you know, we heard from the crew of Malaysia 370 and their final words to controllers as they were entering Vietnamese airspace before that plane disappeared. That can happen rather quickly. It could take a couple of days, a week or so. That really depends on the local authorities.
And Tom, would you believe this is the anniversary of TWA 800?
I hadn't even realized that, but it absolutely is. It was 18 years ago tonight. I remember that night very well because I was in Brussels and my daughter was being born that night. So that's absolutely right. And what a tragedy that was. And that turned out to be an accident, the result of what they believe was a spontaneous combustion in the center fuel tank of that plane.
1996, 230 souls lost off the coast of East Mauritius on the southern reaches of New York's Long Island. And of course, back then, the worst was feared that night, that it had been a rocket or a missile. It was still kind of taking off from reaching its glide path from New York's Kennedy Airport on this very day. And the other aviation incident that people have already mentioned, Tom, is the Korean Air incident.
Yes, the shoot down of the Korean Airline Flight 007, is that correct?
That's
if I'm
right.
remembering correctly? Yep. When it flew over the Kamchatka Peninsula. This was way back during the Cold War days, 1983, if memory serves, in which a Soviet fighter pilot believed that it was a plane masquerading as a commercial plane and thinking that it was a spy plane, and he shot it down on orders, we believe now, from Moscow. Of course, the Soviets denied it for quite a while before the evidence became irrefutable that the Soviets had in fact brought down a Korean passenger plane with all those souls on board, and those were haunting images as well. It was a turning point, many believe, in the propaganda war between the United States and the USSR during the Cold War, and President Reagan at the time talked about the evil empire and how this was an example of it.
Absolutely. 1983. Chris Jansing's over at the White House. Chris, we saw the president give the briefest of remarks at the top of what was admittedly an event on another subject, not even addressing whether or not there were Americans on board. We've heard that first hint during the State Department briefing that there might have been 23 Americans manifested on this aircraft.
Yeah, not surprisingly, Brian, there is an abundance of caution here at the White House, but we are getting some more information about the timing and how the president learned about this. We know he was briefed by his advisors, but he was actually on that phone call with Russian President Putin, who had asked for that call after the stiffer sanctions were imposed yesterday, when the first published reports of this downed jetliner came out. And it was toward the end of that call that Putin actually mentioned it. We are also learning in just a few moments ago from the White House that the president was very firm with President Putin about the reasons for those increased sanctions, and they obviously tie into what's on the ground and the possibility that this jetliner was shot down. The president talked to President Putin about the extensive evidence, the intelligence that the U.S. had been talking about for some time now, that Russia had been increasing the number of heavy weapons that it's been bringing over the border, the buildup, obviously, of Russian forces near the border, and the lack of steps to de-escalate the situation. The way the White House puts it here is that there has been this big disconnect between what Russian officials are telling them and what we know from intelligence. And obviously, Brian, if it turns out that there is some relation, and we've been talking about an abundance of caution, we don't know what happened. If it does turn out there are American citizens on board and that somehow this conflict, this war zone, resulted in the downing of a commercial jetliner, it would be a game changer.
Ну, это значит, наверное, летчик господин.
А ты на видос снимаешь? Люди все радуются. Тут с этой стороны.
А чем ты это носишь? Никуда не.
Там не бомбануло.
Оно сначала летело.
Или там в нескольких частях, слышишь? Да, походу горит.
Только что вот смотрю, вон сбили самолет, он падает вниз, упал. Вот туда, где прогресс.
Ладно, все, солнышко.
Прогресс.
Да вот мы вышли, вон, видишь, вон осколки еще летят, вон черные.
Да.
Что-то бахнуло, да вон еще падает. Вон, смотри, черный дым за терриконом, где прогресс.
Пошла работа.
Выйди. Смотри, вот
Да,
террикон на красное, этот, смотри,
а там живой же...
черный дым поднимается, нихера себе. Вот мы только что смотрели, как самолет взорвался и падает. Да, падал самолет.
Ну крепко жахнуло.
А ну позвони ему.
We have the benefit experts to be able to do an examination of the aircraft to determine, in fact, if it was struck, where it was struck, what kind of weapon was used. They'll also be able to understand the trajectory of the weapon that was fired, where it came from and it originated. So they're going to be able to get some real-time information on the ground very quickly. As for Russia, there's no way that Russia is going to claim that they shot down a passenger plane, ever.
Right.
Even if they had some kind of involvement in it by providing the weapon systems or anything like that, they're not going to claim this. It is too problematic for them internationally to do so.
All right. And you know what? Before we go to Wendell, I do want to say this. There was a tweet that was put out very early on. Do we have that to pop up on the screen? I don't know if we do or not.
I've got the tweet in front of me.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, Sandra.
Well, I mean, this is important. This is what we know because, again, we're going off of reports from Interfax, which is a Russian non-government news agency. But this is what we do know. This is Malaysian Airlines tweeting this out, that they have lost contact with MH117 from Amsterdam. The last known position was over Ukrainian airspace. More details to follow. I've got the Twitter feed in front of me constantly. I'll be watching it. Something else that has also been confirmed is the London Bureau, our London Bureau, is reporting that Amsterdam Airport is still not confirming anything on their side as well. So we're going
Except that the plane took off from there.
Except for the fact that the plane took off from there.
All right. A couple new things. And you'll see us intermittently put up this Sky News video of that smoke, and there it is again. We want to just say this and get on the record with this now. This is what witnesses are telling us that is on the ground there. We're not getting what we like to do is triangulate confirmation of that from the airline, from Amsterdam, from the people who we have as sources inside that border area of Ukraine as well. So until we can really confirm that with 3 different sources, let's just go on the fact that that's possibly where the plane went down. We do know that other planes have gone down in this region. Just on Monday, a cargo plane was reportedly shot down in that same region. I mean, it's a war zone. Now, I had originally asked Kirsten this question about the White House. We're still trying to get some information, and let's go to Wendell Goler, who's live outside the White House. I'm curious, because this is kind of an interesting place where the president might step in. How do you get in? There's a war going on. You've got Putin on one side. What are your sources telling you, Wendell?
Well, we're still waiting for comment from the White House and from the State Department. The State Department folks have indicated they will comment during their briefing this afternoon. The president, of course, on his way to Delaware for an event on infrastructure. These reports came in just as Marine One was taking off from the South Lawn. This, of course, comes a day after the president stepped up sanctions on Russia. He said they hadn't stopped supporting the pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine. In fact, officials said on background they had increased their support for pro-Russian separatists. And on the transport plane shot down on Monday that you mentioned, senior administration officials said that plane was shot down